So beauty is not superficial for us. We would not describe the ultimate of beauty as, say, Venus de Milo. No, beautiful, the most beautiful object you've ever seen in the world. That's not beauty for us. Beauty is more about the beauty that is within beauty rather than the beauty of beauty. The beauty that's within beauty is the ability to actually see something beyond its superficial appearance, to be able to understand and to see the beauty that lies within it. So yesterday I was sitting on my patio and there's a beautiful tree that has come into leaf at the end of the garden, actually in our next door neighbor's garden. It's a deltoid poplar. It's a magnificent tree. I've been watching it over the course of the years. It continues to grow, and I just sat there and I took in the beauty of it, its shining leaves and how beautiful it was. That's just Tiferet. Tiferet, Sheba Tiferet, the beauty that's within it, is to look more deeply into that tree and to understand not just its external form and how pleasing it is and how beautiful and how perfect it is in its symmetry, in its greenness, in its shape, in its size, but to understand something about the tree itself, to see its inner life, to be able to understand the magic of what is happening within it, the way in which it is stretching upwards to the heavens, the fact that it has a soul, that it has a life, that it has a connection in its roots with other trees. It gives me a sense that there's something deeper to this tree. This tree, I see it not just as an object of beauty, but as an object of God's creation, of something that exists within his world with a soul in it. And that is to look beyond the superficial. And so it is with the beauty of a human being, to look beyond the superficial beauty, that you see a beautiful form, either in a statue or in a real person, and you say, goodness me, isn't that beautiful? But the real beauty of a person, as we know, is not just the outside. It's the ability to actually see them on the inside as well, and to be able to see the depth of that person's soul, to be able to understand the qualities that they have, to understand the goodness that's within them, to understand even the compassion that's within them, to be able to deeply sense the other person in the most innermost way is to see their inner beauty rather than their superficial outside. The problem, of course, for us as human beings is that we are, with our power of sight, very superficial. We look at things always on the outside. And to take that step, that leap, to be able to go beyond that to the inside, is what is demanded of us in today's sphere of the Tiferet that is within the Tiferet. Rabbi Chanani Be'akash Omer, Ratzu Kodesh Baruch Hu Zak Yisrael, Lefichach Hir B'em Tomitzvah, Shneimar Nechefetz Man Tzidkoi, Yagil Terev Yagil. The counting of the Omer today. Hayom Shmona Asayom Shehem Shnei Shavuos V'Arba'a Yamim LaOmer. Today is the 18th day of the Omer, which now constitutes 2 weeks and 4 days. That being the case, the Sphira today, the emotional attribute upon which we need to work in terms of our own personal refinement and development, is still in the week of Tiferet, but being the fourth, the fourth in the series from the beginning of this Sphira, today is Netzach, Netzach of Tiferet. Netzach, as we've explained before, is the attribute of victory or consistency. And in regard to Tiferet, which we've defined as compassion or as kindness, the question of Netzach is the question, therefore, of whether one can be consistent in the compassion that one is able to express in the world. Is it reliable within us? Does it prevail against all the other forces in my life? The things which make us emotional in other areas and therefore shut us down. And so occasions when there is a demand that we should be compassionate, we're just shut down to it and insensitive to it, because that consistency, that ability that it should break through and should be victorious, so to speak, within us is absent. Am I ready to stand up for another person? You know, when the moment arrives, will my compassion prevail under all circumstances. That is one dimension of it. But we've also described Tiferet as beauty. And in this regard, there is another concept as well. There are many people who do lots of good things, but they do those things with a kind of a pessimistic attitude. They see the world as a pretty awful, bad place. And so it's as if they are kind of like a drop in the ocean. I'll do my little good thing, but the world is such an awful place. It's actually not going to make very much difference at all. And if one takes a pessimistic view of the world, that it is a bad place, it's an evil place, it's a place where bad people prevail, where bad things prevail, and then eventually that sense of beauty is going to wither, and it's just going to shrivel, and it's going to be lost. There is another way to see the world, and the Tiferet, the Netzach that is within Tiferet, the victory that is in that beauty, is the ability to actually see the world as a beautiful place, to see it as the Almighty's garden, to see it as a place of enormous possibility of beauty, even though there are lots of negative things, but to be able to see beyond that, and to be able to see the gifts that the Almighty has given us, the pleasure that He takes in His garden. Yesterday, I had a chat with my sister who is in the west coast of America, in Portland, Oregon, a place called Lake Oswego. And she wanted to show me, I guess she doesn't have anyone to show it to, but she wanted to video and show me her beautiful garden. She lives alongside a beautiful river in a beautiful property, and she's passionate about gardening. And she wanted to show me how everything is incredible bloom, just absolutely gorgeous. The rhododendrons, the azaleas, they are just absolutely bursting out. And she said to me, you know, Shlomo, she said, nature is laughing at us. Nature is telling us, hey, look here, mate, we are still in control of this universe. Yes, you're worrying about your coronavirus. He said, but look what we are doing. Look what we have produced. Look, it's springtime out over there. And she was just saying this, it's so beautiful. It's so absolutely breathtaking. You just see growth and development. Well, that's because she wants to look at the world as a beautiful place. And the difference between a person who looks at the world as a beautiful place and the person who looks at the world as an ugly place is going to be in relation to how long we can last, whether there's netzach in the beauty, whether that beauty will persist. So netzach shebeteferet is that ability to remain constantly aware of the beauty of our universe and to be able to see beyond some of the superficial negativity and the things which are so distressing. And they are genuinely distressing, there's no question about it. There's some awful things going on, but we look beyond that and we see its inner beauty. And in terms of our compassion, we'll never stop being compassionate in every situation. Rabbi Hananya ben Akasha Omer, Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'zach Yisrael Lefichach Chirvam K'mitzvos, Shene'emar Anech Ve'etzeman Tzidkoi Yagdil Ter Ve'yadir. Of the day, Hayom Tishas Hayom Shehem Shnei Shavuos V'chamisha Yamim LaOmer. Today is the 19th day of the Omer. That is 2 weeks and 5 days, and therefore today it is Hod Shebeteferet. Hod we've always translated as humility, and this is the humility that has to be present in all compassion, not to be condescending or to be pretentious in the way in which we express our compassion. At the same time, to acknowledge that if there is a person who's in need of compassion, and the Almighty has put that person in that position and put us in a position where we're able to offer that compassion, it should be done with enormous humility and without any sense that by virtue of the fact that we are the giver and the other is the receiver, that in any sense we are therefore in a more powerful or a more privileged position, or a position that makes us feel in ourselves any better than the other person. The Almighty creates those who are able to give, those who need to receive. He brings the two together, and each one has a holy task. The one to receive with gratitude, the one to give with humility, and that's Hod Shebeteferet. But I want instead now to move on to Yom HaZikaron. And in the first instance, I want to read a prayer for all of the fallen soldiers, and then just to tell you just a little story. So the prayer goes as follows. God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant fitting rest on the wings of the divine presence in the heights of the holy, the pure, and the brave, who shine like the radiance of heaven, to the souls of the holy ones who fought in any of Israel's battles, in clandestine operations, and in Israel's defense forces, who fell in battle, in terrorist atrocities, and who sacrificed their lives for the consecration of God's name, for the people, and for the land. And for this we pray for the ascent of their souls. Therefore, Master of compassion, and of course it is Tiferet, shelter them in the shed of your wings forever, and bind their souls in the bond of everlasting light. The Lord is their heritage. May the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, be their resting place, and may they rest in peace, and may their merit stand for all Israel, and may they receive their reward in the end of days. And let us say Amen. And as for the story, it is a story which is told by a man called Rabbi Ari Khan, who is a well-known rabbi in Israel. And it tells the story of how, as a young man, he was able to study under one of the great, great sages of the previous generation. And his name was Rabbi Gastman. He was a very modest man, but he was a very great Talmid Chacham from the old world. And he ran a little yeshiva, but once a week on a Thursday afternoon, justices of the Supreme Court and all important intellectual personages used to crowd into his little room and used to hear a shiur from him, which took them back to the days of Vilna in the old days. At any rate, he formed a relationship. One of the people who used to attend his shiur was a man called Professor Alman, who subsequently was from the Hebrew University, who subsequently was awarded the Nobel Prize. And Rabbi Alman's son in 1982 fell in one of the battles, and he was buried in Mount Herzl. And after the funeral, Rabbi Gastman went to his home to comfort him at the shiva. And while he was sitting over there, Professor Alman said to him, Rabbi, I appreciate you coming to see me now. I said, but really, you should be going back to the yeshiva to your students. So Rabbi Gastman responded to him and said, I'm sure you don't know this. He said, but I had a son called Meir. He was a very beautiful child. He was taken from my arms and he was executed in front of me by the Nazis. Later on, he said, I bartered my son's shoes for food in order to be able to live. He said, but the truth of the matter is, I couldn't eat that food. I had to give it away. So they bonded because they had both lost a son, and they had this very special relationship. Rabbi Gastman then subsequently passed away, and this is the bit of the story that I really want to tell you, because our author, Rabbi Khan, describes the last time he saw Rav Gastman. He said, I was walking in Jerusalem with my wife and my oldest son, who was in a stroller. We saw the Rosh Yeshiva and we greeted him. Then I did something I rarely do. I asked him to bless my son. Rav Gastman looked at the toddler, smiled and said, may he be a boy like all other boys. At first, my wife and I were stunned. What kind of blessing was that from a Rosh Yeshiva? We expected a blessing that the boy should grow up to be a tzaddik, he should be a Talmid Chacham, the kind of blessing which you normally expect from somebody like that. But he blessed him instead that he should just be like all other boys. It took many years for this beautiful blessing to make sense to us. The blessing was that he should have a normal childhood, that he should have a normal life. Looking back, I realized what a tremendous blessing Rav Gastman gave and why he gave it. Today, says Rabbi Khan, our sons are soldiers in combat units in the Israel Defense Forces. I pray that they return home safely along with all of their comrades and lead normal lives, quote, just like all the boys. There's always this tension in Israel between, on the one hand, recognizing that on the one, we have to work very hard to protect the country, and it's abnormal in so many ways, and this great dream of the Zionist founders that it'll be a country like all other countries. There's a sense in which we don't actually want it to be a country like all other countries. We want to be different to other countries, higher, better, bigger, but certainly in terms of young men and women being able to lead normal lives of the kind that we can expect to live, if there's a normal today, then that is certainly a sentiment that Rav Gustman was expressing, that our young people don't have to put themselves in the line of danger in defense of their country and of their values and everything which we stand for. And Yom HaZikaron is the day in which we just remember the enormous sacrifices that have been made in order for ordinary Israelis to be able to lead normal lives. Okay, that's our story for today. Yom HaZikaron tonight. Turning to the Sfira, and first of all, the counting of the Sfira today. Hayom Esrim Yom Shehem Shnei Shavuos V'Shisha Yamim LaOmer. Today is the 20th day of the Omer, which constitutes now 2 weeks and 6 days. That being the case, we have today the Sfira of Yesod, of Tiferet. Yesod we have translated as bonding, and the bonding of Tiferet is that when a person shows compassion, because Tiferet we've translated as compassion, it's not good enough that it should simply be a one-way traffic, neither is it good enough that it should only be momentarily. The bonding is that magic we described last week, in which an incredible connection is made between two human beings, as if there's a spirit that flows from one to the other, a binding and a bonding of souls, and that compassion has to be given in such a way that there's that genuine sense of connectedness and bonding with the other person. But more than that, it also has to be a lasting kind of bonding. It's not a moment of compassion in which you suddenly feel flaring up in your emotions a sense of compassion for the situation or for the person. If you're genuinely going to connect with that person, there's going to be a bonding, then that is going to actually continue, and that interaction will be there in a genuine way. I saw a beautiful example of this in a shiva this week for Nina Lewis. Nina died at the age of 96. In her younger years, she was a social worker, and one of the speakers was a young woman who came from a completely broken and very difficult family, without a mother, with a father who was terribly ill, trying to bring up his children. It was a completely destroyed kind of environment. Nina took this young woman, had compassion on her, and took her under her wing and remained her mentor pretty much throughout this young woman's life. And when you heard this young woman speaking, the way in which she wept and the way in which she cried, it was clear that this was not a momentary matter. This was not a moment in Nina's life when she felt compassion for somebody in a professional sense and did what needed to be done. But there was this incredible, incredible bond that was a lasting bond. And that's really what the concept of Yesod, of the bonding that lies in compassion, that's what it really means. I want to just move on and tell you a very moving story, which some of you may have read, because in relation to Yom HaAtzmaut, because it appeared in that fantastic book by Yehuda Avner called The Prime Ministers. Yehuda Avner, of course, was the diplomat, the English diplomat who had gone to Israel and became a confidant and an assistant to a number of prime ministers. He wrote this wonderful, wonderful book. He died just a few years ago. By the way, in the book, he tells this wonderful story of how he has some time with the Queen, and he starts to try and explain to her, that what it means to be a Jew, and how, the tragedy, of how our temple was destroyed and how we were dispersed. And the Queen listens very attentively, and she says, after he's finished his impassioned kind of outburst, she said, "I'm so sorry." She said, "Would you like another cup of tea?" Just one of those wonderful moments in the book. It was terribly English. At any rate, he tells a story about Golda Meir in 1948, just after the state of Israel has been established, and she has become the ambassador to Moscow. And of course, this is at the very height of the time when Jews are not permitted to express their Judaism, to attend synagogue, or certainly not to emigrate to Israel. It was a very, very difficult time for them. So she said, the very first Shabbat, after I'd presented my credentials, my embassy staff joined me for services at the Moscow Great Synagogue. It was practically empty, but the news of our arrival in Moscow spread quickly, so that when we went a second time, the street in front of the synagogue was jam-packed. Close to 50,000 people were waiting for us, old people and teenagers, babies in parents' arms, even men in officer uniforms in the Red Army. Despite all the risks, despite all the official threats to stay away from us, these Jews had come to demonstrate their kinship with us. Inside the synagogue, she went on, the demonstration was the same. Without speeches or parades, these Jews were showing their love for Israel and the Jewish people, and I was their symbol. I prayed together with them on that festival. Oh, how I prayed. I was caught up in a torrent of love so strong, it literally took my breath away. People surged around me, stretching out their hands and crying, Shalom Aleichem Goldele, Shalom Aleichem Goldele. Goldele, Levin sollst du. Golda, I wish you a long life. Good Yom Tov, Goldele. Happy holiday, Golda. All I could say over and over again was, a dank euch, was ihr seid geblieben Jiden. I thank you for having remained Jews. And some cried back to me, Mir danken Medinas Yisrael. We thank the state of Israel. And that was when I knew for sure that our sacrifices in the war of liberation, 1948, our sacrifices were not in vain. I think it's a very beautiful story, and I just wanted to share it with you. So have a lovely, beautiful day. Today we complete the third sphera of compassion, and therefore today is Malchut, sovereignty that exists within compassion. So to understand sovereignty and compassion, we need to understand two extremes. One extreme is the extreme of tolerance. A person can be so tolerant that they actually don't care what anybody else does. You can do whatever you like. I'm tolerant of it. It's your life, doesn't affect me. And so you do what you want and I will do what I want. That's one extreme. The other extreme is when a person has, by the way, you know the old line, what's the difference between ignorance and apathy? And the answer is, I don't know and I don't care. Right. I'll give you about 10 minutes to catch on to the joke and then we'll move on. So at the other end of the extreme, there is a compassion, the compassion that we've been talking about, Tiferet, the way in which Tiferet expresses itself in human terms, which is so extreme that it suffocates the other person. It's almost as if in one's compassion, you want to own that person, and therefore they have to do what you expect of them. They have to do what you want them to do in order for your compassion to find its full expression. You want to own the other person. It's a kind of, although one starts with the very best of intentions, and after all, it is compassion, you're moved by the circumstances the other person finds themselves in, and your heart is moved. But in a sense, it's a kind of emotional bullying. Any bullying which does not recognize another person's integrity or sovereignty is a form of bullying. And Malchut is sovereignty. Sovereignty, the sovereignty of compassion is when one expresses one's compassion in such a way that the outcome of it is that you give the other person the space to grow and develop and to build their own self-esteem. It's very, very difficult if you are a recipient of somebody else's compassion to feel self-esteem, because sometimes you feel belittled by it or overwhelmed by it or inferior to the other person because they're expressing to you their own compassion. So the skill is to be able to show that person the compassion that's in your heart with the actions that accompany it, but in such a way that the other person feels that they're actually being valued, that they have their own self-esteem, that you are helping them to grow and to develop. Imagine, that there's a beggar at the side that's outside a shop and you want to give them some money. How does that person feel when you bend down and you give them money because you feel compassionate about their situation? What have you done for that person? So they're grateful to you. But have you in any way given them any sense of their own self-esteem, that they're a person of worth sitting there on a pavement? So that's the skill of Malchut. And it has to really do two things. The sovereignty has to be not just for the recipient, but it has to be for you as well. Your own sense of dignity and sovereignty has to be intact in the exchange with that other person. Malchut therefore is the completion of the whole sphira of the last of the 7 iterations of Malchut, of Tiferet. We started the week with Chesed, that is in Tiferet, and then we moved on to Gevura, that is in Tiferet, and worked all the way down to Malchut. Malchut is the actualization of that compassion in such a way that it leaves both parties intact and allowed to grow and to flourish. So there you are. So we come now to the 4th week, and we count the day first. Hayom Shnayim ve'Esrim Yom shehem Shlosha Shavuot Yom Echad LaOmer. Today is the 22nd day of the Omer, 3 weeks and 1 day, the beginning, as I mentioned, of the 4th week. And the 4th week is dominated by Netzach. Netzach, which we normally translate as success, or is a hugely, hugely important component part of our emotional construct, because it is the part of us that seeks to be successful. It's the drive inside of us that wants to prevail. And therefore, it is very much connected with the idea of endurance, or of resilience, of determination, this huge sense that we have that we've got to hang in over there, and we have to work to remain with this feeling in order to be able to achieve a goal that we have. So it's about being completely, in human terms, about being consistent, about being driven, about being an achiever, about the drive to succeed. Today, of course, then is the first of the Sfirot, which will be Chesed. And so we're looking today at the Chesed element that has to be present. It has to be present in Netzach. In other words, the element of love that has to be present in this very, very powerful force, which most human beings have to some extent or another inside of us. The problem with raw Netzach, when it is unconnected, unmitigated by the power of Chesed, is that it can become a very, very brutal force. One has all encountered highly determined people who will do everything in their power to achieve their aims, irrespective of the cost. And they won't bother them if in the process of achieving their goals, they step on other people and cause untold misery. And they simply ignore the feelings of other people. One of the elements that we're seeing over here in the Chesed element of Netzach is that for something to genuinely be able to endure, it has to have love in it. First of all, the person who has this goal has to love that goal, has to be something which they feel that they really want is important to them in their lives. But more importantly, the people who are the people who are on the other side of this person's determination need to be able to feel the love and the kindness as well. In other words, it's all very well for me to achieve my goals, but I can't achieve my goals at the expense of another human being. If I lose my capacity to care about the other person, to have love for them, then there's something wrong with the way in which I am expressing my own determination, my own self-determination in my life. So chesed becomes a very important mitigating force, a very important dimension to help to control this incredibly powerful, brutal force that has been built into all human beings, the force to succeed, but to succeed in a way that is refined, is acceptable, that takes into account the other people who we have to engage with in the process of trying to fulfill this very powerful force that's inside of us. And that, in essence, would be the idea of the chesed that has to be within Netzach. Okay, let's come to our counting of the Sphira. And today is Hayom Arba'a ve'Eshrim Yom, Shehem Shlosha Shavuot, V'Shlosha Yamim LeOmer. Today is the 24th day of the Omer. That is now 3 weeks and 3 days. We are still in the week of Netzach. Netzach means, as we've said last week, Netzach means endurance or determination or success or hanging in, that powerful instinct that we have inside of us to want to prevail and to get to the end and not to give up. And today being the 3rd day of the week, therefore, we are in the Sphira and the attribute, the emotional attribute of Tiferet, Tiferet Sheba Netzach, Tiferet meaning compassion. So in what sense do we see this refinement in the human being, the way in which, how do we refine this quality of determination? And the answer is that sometimes our determination and our sense of endurance is actually something very selfish. It's about what I need to hang into, where I need to hang in, where I am determined to succeed, where I need to prevail, where I am not going to give up. It's all about me and about I. But of course, Tiferet is about compassion. That's what the attribute is. And so there is a beautiful idea here that the Tiferet of Netzach is when one's sense of endurance is directed not towards oneself, but compassionately directed towards another human being. In other words, that I am committed and absolutely committed to help another human being survive or grow or develop or improve in some way or another. So I'm applying that power of endurance, not to myself, but to someone else. And you know, sometimes you see this when you have spouses where one of them has been ill for a very long time and the other one has just cared for them, just on and on and on and on, day in and day out, selflessly caring for the other person, never giving up, never allowing the other person to give up, even though, you know, they may be, you know, very, very ill. And you see this beautiful quality in a person, or you see these nurses, you know, or these helpers, so many times, you know, at the time of burial, when I hear the hespedium and I hear the eulogies, the family wants to thank these incredible, incredible carers who have been day in and day out with a, you know, person, sometimes over a period of years, just helping, never giving up on it, always encouraging. In a child, the devotion that we have to a child, to even particularly a child who has special needs, to want to make them the best person that they can be, and never to give up in this, and to every single day, even though it's hugely difficult, you know, it requires an most enormous effort. It requires tremendous, tremendous endurance, but it's endurance which is directed towards another human being. And that is called the Tiferet of Netzach. And it's a very, very beautiful human quality. So all of these qualities are about looking at ways in which we can refine ourselves, refine our own internal qualities. And Tiferet Shebenetzach is one of the better ones. It's a good one to strive for, to find another human being that you want to invest in, whether it is a partner or a stranger or an elderly person, or whoever it is, and not to leave them. It's not a one-off that I'll be with them. And by the way, I think this very much applies also to people who are bereaved, because very often we're with people when they become recently bereaved, and then we give them a call, perhaps a couple of weeks afterwards, and then of course somebody else becomes bereaved, so your attention is now diverted to someone else. So you leave them, so there's no endurance over there. You don't come back and continue to support them. And that's something which we need to learn in ourselves, of how to continuously support people who, and not to simply have our attention distracted and move on to someone else. So the counting of the Omer. Hayom Chamisha ve'esrim yom, shehem shlosha shavuot ve'arba'a yamim le'Omer. Today is the 25th day of the Omer. That is now 3 weeks and 4 days. So we are in the week of Netzach, which we have translated as enduring or determination or constancy, etc. And the 4th day of the week is itself Netzach. So today, therefore, is Netzach, the Netzach that is within Netzach, the enduring of the enduring, which seems like a bit of a puzzle. Let me offer two interpretations or explanations for this. The first is the realization that when we have to endure something, and endure something very hard, something very difficult, we're never quite sure whether actually we have the resources and the strength to be able to see it through. Here's a good case in point in relation to the lockdown. The whole nation had been asked to do something which is really very difficult. And if you had asked us before it happened, do you think we'll be able to manage it and to shut down all of our businesses, all the stuff which has happened in the country? Would have said, well, I don't know whether we'll be able to stick it out. I don't know whether we have the endurance to be able to live with this. So actually what we know about Netzach Sheba Netzach, the endurance of endurance, is actually we have a power to endure that is deeper than we ever imagined. When you call upon that deep, deep, deep power to see you through a difficult time in your life, you discover a hidden strength, a new power of endurance, and something which you never imagined you'd be able to do, rationally when you think about it, before it's ever happened. That is the Netzach, Sheba Netzach. That is the extraordinary power that human beings have. That's one explanation. The second explanation is that actually there are two Netzachs, there are two levels of endurance. There are two areas of determination. A bit like a tree, there's that which is above the ground, and there's that which is below the ground. The endurance that is above the ground we all know about. That's our determination to achieve whatever it is that we've set out to achieve, the stuff which keeps us going, the stuff which keeps us hanging in, etc. That is all well articulated to us. It's conscious. It's something very often that we've thought about. There's a goal that we've set for ourselves, whether it is in our personal lives, in our business lives, in whatever it is. But that is a level of netzach, of endurance, of determination, of fulfillment, of commitment that we are very well aware of. And if one were to question you and to say, well, what is it that you are that you're committed to, you'd be able to articulate it. But there's another level of netzach as well. And like a tree, much of the tree is actually beneath the ground. It's the roots that are very, very deep down. There's another level of endurance which comes from the hidden values that are buried deep down inside of us, that are the wellspring that allows for all of that flourishing above the ground. And those are values that very often we don't articulate to ourselves. Sometimes when I talk to couples who are getting married and we talk about the relationship, and I say, tell me what it is that makes your relationship work, and they tell you about all the superficial stuff. You know, we laugh together, we talk together, we enjoy each other's company, we have similar interests and things like that. I said, no. That's only the superficial stuff. There's other things that are binding it together. There are a whole bunch of hidden values which are lying just beneath the surface. You know, for example, you're coming into this marriage with an assumption that monogamy is going to be the basis upon which you're going to conduct your relationship. You've probably never really spoken about that. It's taken for granted. It's a value that is down somewhere deep down beneath the surface. And so for all of us, there are some very, very, very strong enduring values: a love of justice, a hatred of evil, a sense of what is right and what is wrong, a love of identity, of our Jewishness. These are all, that's the netzach, which lies deeply buried beneath the surface and which feeds the netzach, which is above the surface. So netzach sheba netzach is actually about two different netzachs, two different endurances. And it's as well for us to remember that there are some very, very deeply powerful forces which lie buried within all of us, that give us our identity, that give us our commitment, that give us our sense of drive, that give us a sense of who we are, and that will make us stand up under all circumstances for the things that we hold precious in this world, if we're ever tested to have to do that. That's Netzach Sheba Netzach. And the Sfira today is, as we're on the week of Netzach, is Hod Sheba Netzach. The element of Hod, the dimension of Hod that is present in Netzach. Netzach we have been describing throughout the week as the power of endurance. And Hod we translate as a nuanced somewhere within the idea of splendor and the idea of humility. So what is then the Hod that is present in Netzach? And what does it mean for us? Yesterday, we spoke about Netzach, that is in Netzach, the two different kinds of Netzachs, the fact that this endurance above the surface is the way in which we articulate the things which we want, but we draw on some very deep roots, which is the power of endurance, which comes from the below, which are described as many of our values and the things which we believe very strongly in, that we don't articulate. They're buried beneath the surface and beneath our consciousness, but we're drawing on them all the time. Hod actually provides another, and in a sense, a more important dimension to what underpins our endurance. For the question is, do I attribute my success entirely to my own strength or to my own determination? Where do I get the strength at times when everything just seems so bleak? What is this power that I'm able to draw on that is able to hold people in the most extraordinary circumstances, life circumstances, people who are battered time and time and time again. And nevertheless, they just seem in some way to be able to continue. For many of those who came through the Holocaust, what was the strength that they drew on that allowed them to survive? And so it is in many people's lives. We know that there is a very, very deep and profound strength that's within us. And that strength is because we're drawing not just on our values or on our own energies, but we know we're given a supernatural strength because it comes from our divine, the divine that's within us, from our neshama, that part of God that resides within us. And this gives, therefore, a whole new spin to the idea, to the concept of my determination to succeed. This is not just about me. If I have this power to prevail, to be successful, then I have to have the humility to recognize that it is coming from another source, that it's the divine that's been invested in me that gives me this strength to be able to be sustained in difficult circumstances in my life. And the humble recognition, the acknowledgement that the capacity to endure or to prevail comes from the soul that God gives to each person, doesn't compromise in any way our drive or our endurance. On the contrary, it actually gives it its flavor. It gives us its reality. It gives us that edge of humility that is required always, so that the endurance becomes one that is a beautiful one and a spiritual one, and a one that draws, that recognizes that it is being drawing on a very, very deep and special part that lies buried within all of us. And that is the hod that is within Netzach. Counting of the Sphira, Hayom Shiva ve'esrim yom shehem shlosha shavuot v'shisha yamim la'omer. Today is the 27th day of the Omer, which is 3 weeks and 6 days. So today, therefore, in the week of Netzach, becomes Yesod. Yesod, that is in Netzach. Yesod is about bonding. So the problem with endurance is that very often it just becomes automatic. It becomes unconnected to something which you do simply because you've set your mind to it, and so day by day you continue to endure. Here's a good example. Day by day we all come together for prayer service. It's become almost in a sense part of the routine. Eventually it becomes habitual and you hang in, etc. The Almighty continues to sustain the world on a day-by-day basis. Le'olam devarcha netzach b'shamayim. Forever your words, netzach, are standing in heaven. In other words, the energy still flows into the world on a day-by-day basis. But simple endurance by itself is not good enough if it doesn't actually, if it's not purposeful and if it doesn't connect. Because Yesod is that part that in the Almighty that wants to connect with his universe, connect with the creatures in his universe. And Yesod is that part within us that seeks to bond and to connect with another. So if there is a relationship which is simply enduring, but it's become a little bit habitual and there's no thought that's given to it, just day by day, you're in the relationship, you do all the things which need to be done to sustain it, you're hanging in over there, but where is the real bonding? Where's the real connecting? Where's the real effort that is made to actually connect with that other person? What is the purpose of the endurance? Has it simply become stale and energyless? Is there no real love that's in it? And similarly, when it comes to our daily prayers, are we doing it simply by way of rote? That we're mumbling the prayers, or is an element of bonding in it that we actually are trying to connect and to think about, who we're connecting with and how we are connecting? So Yesod is a very important element because that is the glue, that's the bonding part of our relationships. That's what bonds us together socially. The fact that not just we are here 45 people together on a Zoom collection with lots of beautiful faces all around, and more than 45 people, 45 devices. But where is the connection between us? And the answer is that there is a feeling between us that bonds us together. And that's something which is an intangible. You can't feel this quality of bonding, or rather you can't point to it and say, here it is, I can isolate it, I can show it to you. It's something which is so deep, built within a human being, the ability to connect and to bond, that the other person automatically feels it. Even across the ether, you feel it. It's a supreme quality that the Almighty has bequeathed to us, one of his own qualities, the quality of Yesod, of bonding. So the bonding that lies within endurance is a very important element to ensure that the endurance remains focused. Counting of the Omer. Hayom Shmona ve'esrim yom shehem arba'a shavuos la'omer. Today is the 28th day of the Omer, which now therefore constitutes exactly 4 weeks. So we've completed another week in the 7-week cycle. And being the fact that it is now the completion of the week, it must therefore be the attribute of Malchut, and therefore it'll be Malchut that is contained, that is expressed through Netzach. Malchut means sovereignty or glory. And of course the question is, in what way do we see this nuanced sense in? So Malchut always is the completion, encompasses all of the previous 6 attributes that we've spoken about during the course of the week, that are all contained within Netzach, and it is holds them all together, and therefore it is the total expression of a person's capacity for Netzach, for endurance. In another sense, one would say that it is really the majesty of the human spirit to be able to endure. So the question over here then is, when one has taken all these variations on the theme, the nuanced senses, parts of Netzach, at the end of it, one has to ask the question, this endurance that I have, is it dignified? Does it bring out the very best in me? When faced with hardships that I have to endure in life, how do I behave? Do I behave with sovereignty like a king or like a queen? Do I walk very proudly with my head up and confident in my God-given strengths? Do I have confidence in myself? Or do I just curl up in a ball and just wait for these terrible things to pass me by? So the dignity with which we carry ourselves, the dignity with which we face difficulty and hardship in our lives, the dignity in which we contain all the different dimensions of Netzach, from Chesed and Kavura and Tiferet, and Netzach of Netzach, and the Sod and the Yisod and the Hod and the Yisod, etc. All of that is part of the dignity of this concept called my ability to withstand things in this world, to be able to endure through difficult times, or to be able to pursue my goals. And the way in which I do it, the way in which I carry myself, is the malchut, the sovereignty, the royalty with which I express myself as a human being. And one has often seen human beings, dealing with situations in very different ways. For some, you just can't help but pity them because they're so overburdened, overburdened by the circumstances of their lives. They just feel you're looking at a battered human being. On other occasions, you see these people that have such difficult lives. There's so much that they have to endure, and they carry themselves with such a sense of majesty, not pride and not arrogance, but you just sense their sovereignty, their control of themselves, their ability to manage it. It's part of the dignity of human spirit to be able to do that. It's very special, and that is called malchut. That's the malchut that exists within Netzach. Because today is a very significant day. It is Hod Shebo Hod. I'm going to count the sphere first and then talk just very briefly about the nature of this day. Hayom Shlosha Shloshim Yom Shehem Arba'a Shavuot V'Chamisha Yamim LeOmer. Today is the 33rd day of the Omer. It is 4 weeks and it is 5 days of the Omer. In the week of Hod, it is Hod Shebo Hod, the splendor of splendor, the humility of humility, the gratitude of gratitude, all of that wrapped up in the day. Today, according to our tradition, is the day in which Shimon bar Yochai passed away. He was buried in Meron, that is at the bottom of the Galilee. In ordinary times, thousands and thousands of people would be at his graveside. And it is strange that there should be such incredible rejoicing for the day in which a person dies. But Reb Shimon bar Yochai, who was the author of the Zohar, a deeply, deeply, profoundly spiritual man who understood some of the secrets of the world, understood that a soul comes into the world, it fulfills its destiny, and on the day of its passing, it is the culmination and the completion of everything that that soul was able to achieve in the world. And it has left the world much richer than it was before that soul came into the world. And as a consequence, this is a day of rejoicing, although we see the day of passing normally as a day of mourning, but there's another element of it, which is a day of rejoicing, because it is rejoicing for the fulfillment of a life in every respect and for everything that that human being has achieved. And he himself brought light into the world. And they say that on Hod Shebo Hod, there is an incredible light that fills this universe, a light of spirituality. He opened the Kabbalah to us. He opened the deeper teachings, the mystical teachings, the deeper teachings of Torah, that it should become available to all of us, latterly through the process of Chassidut that has enriched all of our lives. And so therefore it's a very special day. And it's a day of gratitude, humility of humility, because a vessel that is full can receive nothing more. A vessel that is empty is open to receive the light. And one can't express one's deepest faith if one is full of oneself. So the way to actually reach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way in which to fill ourselves with a faith which is not just a theoretical faith, but one which actually informs our lives, that is present with us in all of our actions and everything that we do, in our senses, in our awareness on a daily basis as we go through the world, as we feel our own sense of purpose and the fulfillment of our lives, is that there has to be a very deep sense of gratitude to the Almighty for our lives, and a very deep sense of humility, so that we are open to be able to receive that which shines down into us by way of blessing into our lives. So Hod Sheva Hod is a very special day, and it's entirely appropriate, therefore, that we should be celebrating and commemorating the fulfillment of lives in this world. Angela's life, that's Susan's sister and Joy's mother, and Sydney's life and Mark Mother's life, and in a different kind of way that Laurie should be able to acknowledge the preciousness of life as well, having seen just how close it is to be at the other side of life and to have come so close to death. All of this has happened on Hod Sheva Hod by providence, and it is very significant, very special, and it should all come together on one single day. Hayom 35 yom shehem 5 shavuot laOmer. Once again, we have completed a week, as we always do on Thursdays. And today is the 35th day of the Omer, which now constitutes exactly 5 weeks, with 2 weeks to go to Shavuot. Amazing that it is already 5 weeks from Pesach. How the time flies. Okay, well, because it's the last day of the week in the 7-day cycle, that of course is going to bring us back once again to Malchut. Malchut meaning the sovereignty, and since the entire week has been the Sphira, the attribute of Hod, of humility, we're looking over here today at the idea of the sovereignty that lies embedded within humility. And the truth of the matter is that once again, this is a conundrum and a contradiction. Because when you look at a person who exhibits sovereignty, a king or queen, the last thing you see in them is any sense of humility. On the contrary, in order to project their, I notice that Francis is here as well, and I'm not sure whether Susan is here, so we will want to say the psalm for the Shiva. Francis, I can't remember now which day you're going to be out of Shiva. If you'd like to prepare to the idea of Malchut that exists within Hod. So once again, there's a contradiction between the idea of humility and the idea of sovereignty, because sovereignty means projecting yourself in such a way that people see who you are, you see, that you actually have to present your personality, your presence, your authority, all the things which most ordinarily flow not from humility, but flow from one's own sense of self-importance, or the importance of one's position, and the need to impose one's importance upon everybody else, so they recognize that you're different to everyone. That's what makes you a king or a queen. And so you see that always with royalty. And yet we have this concept, this idea that Moses, who in many respects had malchut, had sovereignty, he was he wasn't a king, but he was the leader of the Jewish people, and yet he's the humblest of all men. You have King David, who's a king, and yet he has a sense of humility. So how do we reconcile that? And I have to say, in my own experience, that when one saw, as I had the opportunity to do and the privilege in my life, to be close to the Lubavitch Rebbe of blessed memory, he really exuded malchut. You really had a sense that you're looking here at a king. and yet he conducted himself with immense humility. There was you never had any sense of ego exuding from him. So how do we reconcile these two? And I think it is because there's two different kinds of ways in which Malchut expresses itself. The real Malchut, real sovereignty, is when one senses in a person not them, but the presence of God, the presence of the spiritual power that's in them, which is God-given. So you see something, you see a saintly, godly person. It's a reflection of the Almighty Himself, and it's very, very powerful. It's very deep. And that can only happen if the person himself is small. Because as God says, there's no space for me and you in the world at the same time. Either you're going to be there or I'm going to be there, mate. And if you want me to be there and if you want me to shine out of you, you're going to have to make yourself smaller. So the Malchut that we're talking about over here is not the Malchut of ego. It's the Malchut of the godliness that exists within all of us. And that when you meet a person who just exudes this different kind of spirit, you sense in them something higher, something majestic, something powerful, and you realize that what you're seeing over here, what you're experiencing over here, is something which is transcendent. There's a different part of them. This is because they've allowed their souls, their neshama, the godliness within them, to express itself in their lives, and it effuses itself through their entire being. They carry it inside of them, and it just seeps out so that you sense it and you see it and you feel it for all the majesty that it expresses. And that's only because they've removed themselves. That's the humility. So the Malchut of Hod is really the culmination of the entire week. And the way in which a human being can transform themselves into another kind of person. And by the way, you can't bluff it, and you can't even strive for it. It's something which has to happen. It has to happen when a person allows themselves to become, when a person works in their own humility and their own self-identity to the point where the deeper part of them is allowed to shine out. And when you see it, it's very, very beautiful. And that is the majesty that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has implanted in every single one of us, but which is so very hard to express because we're just too full of ourselves and we get in the way. Okay, let's. Of the Omer. Hayom Shisha Shloshim Yom Shehem Chamisha Shavot V'Yom Echad LaOmer. Today is the 36th day of the Omer. We begin now the 5th week, as 5 weeks and 1 day. And therefore, since we now enter a new week, we begin a new emotional attribute to work on this week. And it's a very important one. It's the penultimate one. And let me put it into context. All of the other 5 qualities that we've been looking at over the last 5 weeks, love, discipline, compassion, endurance, humility, they're all about the way in which I refine my own feelings so that I can beam across to another person in a more effective way. But in every one of these instances, I remain separate from that other person. And the reality is that we're all locked up in our own little world. We human beings, how do I know what is going on inside your mind? How do I know that you feel things the way in which I feel? There's no way, because I can never be inside your feelings as you can't be inside mine. So every human being is an island, really, and it could be, in human terms, a very, very lonely place. Yes, of course, we can communicate with speech, and therefore we can share and try and describe what we're feeling, and sometimes quite accurately. And on that basis, I begin to develop the distinct impression that you hear the things that I hear, that you see things that I see, that your feelings are not much different to my feelings, and that we are made in the same way. But it's only because we've communicated to each other, but we remain distinct, one from the other. So there is now another incredibly powerful instinct that the Almighty has built pretty much into every creature, but one which, despite the fact that it's instinctive, we are able to work with and to refine and to improve. And it's called bonding, Yesod. That is the theme of the Sphera for this week, to bond. Bonding is it's the bridge that that brings between two human beings, that binds them together. In many respects, it's the foundation of life. Every human being needs bonding in order to flourish. The bonding between a mother and a child, for example, the bonding between a husband and a wife, the bonding between brothers and sisters, the bonding between close friends. Bonding gives a person a sense of belonging, that they're not alone in the world, that I am significant, that I'm important, that I am an entity. It creates trust between human beings. And there's this incredible instinct, and the Almighty has built it into animals as well, the instinct of motherhood, the mother lion that is hugely fierce in protecting her cubs, and so too with pretty much with all creatures. This is the power that connects creatures and human beings, bonding. The foundation of bonding, the bedrock upon which all bonding has to build, is love. Unless there's a feeling of affection towards the other, there is no bonding that is going to occur. And therefore, the very first of the variables in bonding is chesed sheba yesod, the chesed that lies in yesod, in bonding. Chesed meaning love, because love is what makes me want to bond with you. Love is what makes my bonding with you a proper bonding, because you feel that love. And because you feel that love, it's what connects us one to the other. So it's an incredibly, incredibly important human dimension, which we simply take for granted, because we're bonding all the time in lots of different contexts. Even in a casual interaction in a shop, when you're handing money over or a card, etc., and you look at the teller, there's a moment in which, as human beings, we are bonding. It's only fragmentary and it's only momentary, and it's not a real bonding. It's not a lasting bonding, because that person is not sufficiently important in your life, but there has been an interaction. But with those around us, of course, we do bond. And the problem is, as everybody knows, that sometimes that bonding becomes very frayed. Becomes frayed either because we neglect it, or because things get in the way that destroy it, that undermine it. Stuff gets in the way in our lives, in our emotions, because we're very complex human beings. Our emotions are very complex. So being able to work on the bonding, to know that there is an instinct to bond, that it's the foundation of life, it's the foundation of humanness, it's what brings us into society, it's what connects us to our families, to our environment around us, to our community, to be aware that there's this thing called bonding, and that it needs to be worked on, and it needs to be refined, and it can be made better, and that when it is made better, then life becomes more enjoyable, because I'm no longer feeling alone or isolated. I'm feeling connected, I'm feeling part of, I'm feeling that I belong, all of those things which are so hugely important to our mental health, to our mental well-being. And it has to be said that in these days, when we're practicing a new kind of art called virtual bonding, it's a whole new ballgame. It's something which we've never had to do before. We're learning our way. And what is really important about even just little things like this little community that is formed in the mornings is that we are here because we are bonding with each other. We are feeling ourselves to be part of a little community. Of course, there's a big community around us as well called South Hampstead. There's another bigger community called, our neighborhood. There's another bigger community called society. But human beings need to bond sometimes in the smallest contexts in order to feel that they belong. So we create little circles, little groups. And this is one of them. And it's very important. That's why we're all coming back here in the mornings, not just because we want to pray, but because something much deeper than that, something much more subtle than that is happening. There is a process of bonding. And the magic of it is what we've discovered is that while we've always imagined that bonding needs physical proximity, you can't bond with somebody unless you can actually be in their presence, look into their eyes, hug them, touch them. We're so tactile as human beings. We need to touch, we need to feel. And here we don't have any of that. So the great experiment of this time is how one finds bonding in the virtual space. And it's amazing to recognize that actually, even in this context, it can still happen. And that is, we have to say, Yeshu Koyach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's given us something very special. He's given us the ability to bond across space, virtually. We never realized that bonding is really so deep. We never realized that it can fly. We never realized that it works across the ether. But it has to have love. And we're all here because there's love. It's not love of the kind of, passion. It's not the love of lovers. That has to be in a different context. But it's the love of simply wanting to be with other people who are like us, who share our values, who smile at us in the mornings and to whom we can smile to as well, to whom we can wave to. Our sense of community, our sense of lovely people, of people who we feel comfortable with, that we want to be with, may not be our best friends, may not be people who we want to spend all of our time with, but it is a real sense of love that binds a community together. And what we have here is a community within a community. That's what we've created. The problem, of course, is that these communities become closed. There are 40 people who join us every day, and it doesn't seem to grow or to develop. And maybe we need to tell others that there's something special happening over here. There's a secret that we have discovered that is very precious. Maybe we don't want other people to come in because it destroys the coziness of our little group with which now we feel so comfortable. We see all the familiar faces. But what is happening underneath all of this is the process of bonding. And as we'll explore during the course of the week, starting with love of bonding, chesed, that is in Yesod today, we'll see some of its other variables during the course of the week until once again we'll complete this week and ultimately come to the build up to Shavuot and the completion of this whole extraordinary process of exploring our own feelings through the Sfirot that the Almighty has bequeathed to us. So, Hayom Tisha U'Shloshim Yom, Shehem Chamisha Shavuot Va'arba'a Yamim LaOmer. Today is the 39th day of the Omer, which is 5 weeks and 4 days. 39 days and 49 days altogether, so it's 10 days to go to Shavuot. And because we're now in the 5th day of the week, it brings us to Yesod, which is about attachment, to Netzach, which is about endurance. And it is the endurance within Yesod, the endurance that has to be present within bonding. And that raises, therefore, a question, because if bonding is something which is so deeply instinctive, our ability to bond with others, and so necessary, that it's something which we need so much, and something which we do on a regular basis with people who we love around us, etc., and bonding is so much a part of our life, why do we need to have a special instruction, a special kind of exercise to make sure that it endures, that there's endurance in bonding? And I think the answer to that is because stuff gets in the way. There's stuff that gets in the way of our bonding, and most of the stuff that gets in the way actually comes from inside of us, and it's called emotions. Most people, if you ask them and you say to them, "Are you a rational person or an emotional person?" Many people will say, "No, I'm very rational." Men will tell you they're rational at any rate. The reality is that actually we are very emotional creatures, all of us. We get hurt very easily, even when we don't show it. And we get hurt most when we feel slighted by the people who we love, when you just don't feel that you're being valued or respected, or you're being put down or whatever. And that is why our relationships, particularly with the ones we're closest to, has its kind of fluctuations. You're kind of like a bit closer and a little bit more distant, and the bonding becomes interfered with. By the way, this particularly happens in relation to matters relating to sexuality and relating to intimacy, because that is where we hurt each other most. And because it is a very private area, we're actually embarrassed to express our feelings. So we keep our feelings all bottled up, and you never actually get to say to the person that you love and with you bond the things that actually you really want to say, because it's a bit either embarrassing or because it's too private, etc. So we're very, very complex human beings in regard to our inner emotional lives. And that creates ripples on the line in terms of our connection, our bonding with people. Now, if you were to pare it back, God forbid, even if you're going through a period of baddies, in your relationship, you're just kind of like off, it's just not there. If God forbid something urgent were to happen, something terrible to happen, there would be an illness, something like that, all of a sudden, you suddenly realize that underneath it all, yes, I do love you, and I'm there for you, and I will always be here to support you. And it kind of brings you back to the reality of the real bond which lies beneath the surface. But you have to work at it. And that's the idea of the endurance and bonding. By the way, exactly the same idea applies not in our human relationships, but in our relationship with God as well. A friend of mine, when I was in yeshiva, when we were really working hard, trying to be religious, and we were really into this avodah, into this, personal development stuff. And he said to me once, he said, some days I just take a holiday from God. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it doesn't change anything that I do. I do all the same stuff. I still wake up in the morning and daven, put my tefillin and go through the whole day, etc. But in my mind, I'm a million miles away. The bond is not there. I kind of like flit in and out. There are times when I'm closer, and there are times when I'm a little bit further away. So sometimes I'll go a little bit kind of irreligious inside. Not on the outside, on the inside. And that's the point about bonding. It's a very, very inside thing. It's not something which always shows on the outside. On the outside, you could be the same smiling person as always, but something has happened inside that doesn't quite connect in the same way. Because the bonding has been affected by one's emotional state. All the other stuff which is swimming around beneath the surface, sometimes in the subconscious, and not always in our total control. And the whole point about these 7 weeks is about the way in which one takes mastery of one's emotions, the way in which one becomes the master of one's emotions, being able to control them. And the beginning of control starts with understanding. Until you understand the nuances of it, you don't know which areas to work on. That's the genius of these 7 weeks, with these 7 variations between the seven core emotions of and attributes of a human being. So endurance in bonding therefore becomes something which is important. It's actually very hard to remain consistent in one's level of bonding, which is not to say that, again, that the bonding isn't there beneath the surface. It just means that at the conscious level, in one's heart and one's mind, It's sometimes very hard to sustain, and it needs an effort called the netzach of Yesod, the bonding, the endurance within the attribute of bonding. First of all, we need to count the Omer, and Hayom Arba'im Yom Shehem Chamisha Shavuot v'Chamisha Yamim LaOmer. Today is the 40th day of the Omer. It is now 5 weeks and 5 days. We are in the week of Yesod, which is a week in which we're talking about the emotional attribute of being able to bond with other human beings, to be able to bond with God, and being the fact that it's the 5th day of the week, we have discussed some of the aspects of this in terms of that there has to be love in bonding in order for it to work. There has to be some restraint in bonding that we discussed yesterday, to ensure that it is appropriate kind of bonding. There has to be compassion in bonding. But what we learned today is that it's the Hod of Yesod. Hod is once again the idea of humility. Humility that exists in bonding. Well, of course, the one thing which divides all human beings is arrogance. The reality is this, that you have two distinct human beings with completely independent personalities. Each one lives in their own world. And to be able to bridge across them and to create a connection between them actually requires an enormous amount of effort. But one of the things that it needs is humility, and it needs humility at two levels. What I would term a lower level, and what I'd describe the higher level as well. The lower level is perfectly well understood. If one is completely preoccupied with one's own needs and desires and one's own world, then you're never going to be able to bond with another person, because what then happens is that the bonding actually becomes just an extension of your own needs. What happens is that you're bonding more tightly with yourself, not with the other person. And that is not the object of the exercise when it comes to bonding. Healthy bonding is when you have the union, the coming together of two distinct human beings with independent personalities who join for a higher purpose than satisfying their own needs. By the way, and we need not be embarrassed about this, but in the Sfirot, in the image, the Sfirot have the image of a man, right hand, left hand, etc. The organ of procreation is Yesod, the image of man. And the reason for that is because it is through the organ of procreation that the most exquisite bonding happens between human beings in the sexual act. And here, this is where you begin to understand not just the lower level of humility that's required, that I shouldn't be full of myself, that I should not be full of my own arrogance, which is self-understood. It's not going to work when you want to bond, because it's not about the other person, it's about me. But this is about understanding the higher level of bonding. The higher level of bonding is the humility which is required over here is the recognition that in order for there to be true bonding between human beings, there has to be a third force that has to come into it. Something which actually brings the two people together. That they are not bonding each one for their own purposes. So, we have this, we blithely say, or say shalom bimramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu. He who makes peace in the high places, may he make peace here on earth. So you have to ask a question over here. What's this business about making peace in the high places, in the heavens? They don't all get on with each other up over there. The angels are fighting with each other. The celestial beings are arguing with each other. What's the peace that the Almighty has to make over there? And the answer to that is that when you've got a force called chesed, for example, of giving, and you've got another divine force called restraint, they are complete opposites one to the other. In order for that to be able to come together and to bond and to be harmonious, there has to be a third force which is higher than both of them. Coming back to the sexual act, the real bonding in intimacy is when people unite, not for themselves, not just to satisfy their needs, but for a higher purpose. True bonding is when both parties actually are uniting for something bigger than each one of them. In other words, in this instance, it's a spiritual act. It's to create life, but it is a bigger purpose, and which then means that each one of them is prepared to forego something of themselves in order, each one forgoes something of themselves in order to coalesce around something that is bigger than both of them. And this brings us back to the bonding between human beings. That bonding, not in their sexual act, but just in our interactions, etc. In the same way, the humility over here has to be the humility to recognize that if there's to be true bonding, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty, has to be present in our both lives as well. To bring two human beings together who are completely distinct forces, each one literally in their own world, or locked up in their own world, that there should be this magic of being able to connect with each other and to bond with each other in the deepest, profoundest sense, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, etc., requires a force that is higher than both of them. That is the third party that exists within the bond. Ability to recognize that third party, the bonding can never happen properly. That is the divine, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that has to be there in the bonding. And that is part of the concept of the humility that is within bonding. Thus, once again, to the thought for the day and the counting of the Sphira in the first instance. Hayom echad va'arba'im yom, shehem chamisha shavuot v'shisha yamim le'omer. Today is the 41st day of the Omer, and that therefore is 5 weeks and 6 days. Goodness me, we almost completed the 5th week. So we are, of course, in the week of the attribute of Yesod in the Sphirot and in our own emotional makeup. Yesod, as everybody by now knows, is about that very important dimension of humanness called bonding, the way in which we're capable of bonding at lots of different levels with other human beings, with the divine. It's a component which takes us out of ourselves and connects us with the other so that we're not locked up in our own little world. Because we are in the 4th day of the week, therefore today the Sphira and the emotional attribute that we have to work on is Yesod Shebi Yesod, the bonding that is within bonding. What on earth could that possibly mean? I'd like to offer 2 perspectives on this today. The first one is the Yesod of Yesod, the bonding of the bonding means that this is the opportunity, this is the time, this is the day in which we make a very thorough examination of our own capacity to bond and the things which work and the things which don't work. You know, do I have difficulty bonding? Is it something which is easy for me? Is it something in my personality? Are there some difficult areas and other areas which are a lot easier? Do I have trouble bonding with people? Do I bond better with my job? You know, a job is one of the big relationships of our lives, because the relationship is defined by something which occupies your mind and you think about all the time, even when you're not doing it. Then our work occupies a huge part of it. So we bond with our work, we bond with other human beings. If I'm not bonding effectively, what are the reasons? Maybe I'm just too critical. Maybe I am. Maybe I find fault with people, and that gets in the way of my bonding. Maybe I'm actually, one of the reasons why I'm bonding, if we go psychologically, is because I never learned how to bond. I never saw bonding from my parents. I got a messed up background, or possibly I've been in a relationship where I've been really, really very deeply hurt, and as a consequence, I don't have a level of trust which allows me to be open and to bond with other people. All of these things in our lives impact upon our capacity to bond effectively with others. And each person will know in their own soul the things which have happened in their lives. If you have had the good fortune to grow up in a loving family with parents, a mum and a dad, who have loved you and been open with you, and you've learned how to connect with them and to bond with them, they've bonded with you, then that is an enormous head start in life. But after that, other stuff happens, which gets in the way, particularly around our relationships. And there are many people who have great difficulty bonding. And you see, fortunately, we live in as Jews, we live in, we have warmth, and warmth helps with bonding. You read about other families where there's just total chaos and they just can't connect with each other. How do I bond with my siblings? That's always, an issue. So that's what it means, the bonding of bonding. But there is another dimension of bonding that I want to touch on today. The Kabbalists talk about two perspectives in this universe. Their terminology for it is da'at elyon and da'at tachton. The supernal perspective, supernal knowledge or perspective, and an earthly perspective. The reality is that probably the way we see the world and the way God sees the world are very different. It's a question of whether you're looking from above or whether you're looking from down here below. And you're looking at the same world, but you're seeing it in a very different way. For God, it all makes perfect sense. For us, a lot of the time, it makes no sense. And there's a dissonance, therefore, between our perspective of the world and what we imagine the divine perspective of the world to be. The bonding of bonding is when you strive to close that gap, to bridge those two worlds, and to try, particularly in the times when we are confronted with things which are inexplicable to us, which might even be, at this time now, where you've had things which just look unfair, things which have happened in the world which seem totally unfair, or where they make no sense whatsoever, looks totally chaotic, and without any kind of purpose. It's a purposeless world. Things that happen randomly, and seeming without reason. That is all because we're looking at it from our perspective. If we could put our heads and our minds to try and connect with the perspective from above, a divine perspective, and to try and see the world, not in terms of our little brief sojourn in the world, but from a bigger divine picture, which spans a much greater period of time, we're aware only of our souls for the period of time that we live. But if a soul is immortal, then there's a much bigger picture. It's a picture of a span of time that we can't just imagine. And everything has to fit into that bigger picture, not the little picture. We're looking at a painting with just a tiny little, we're looking just at one little part of the painting. We don't see the whole painting, and that distorts the perspective altogether. So that's Da'at Elyon and Da'at Tachton, and the Yesod of Yesod is the way in which as humans we struggle to be able to lift ourselves up, to be able to see it from that other perspective. There's a lovely story about a Hasidic Rebbe called the Primish Lama Rebbe. In the little town, the mikveh was a pond down at the bottom of a hill where the Hasidim used to go and dip in the morning. And in the wintertime, it was absolutely treacherous. He used to slide down, it was snowy and icy, etc. And the younger Hasidim, were slipping and falling all over the place. And this elderly Rebbe was like a mountain goat. He just kind of like walked down the hill without any problem. His footsteps were absolutely assured. And the younger Hasidim turned to him and they said to him, Rebbe, how is it that we're slipping and falling all over the place and you are so secure and you're walking so, as if you're on firm ground? He said to them, you know what? He said, if you're holding on above, you can't fall down below. And I've always had this image, of people on the underground holding on to the straps. They hold on to the straps for dear life, and then you don't. The train rattles all over the place, but you're firm. If you're holding on very firmly above, then you don't fall down below. And that is the image of Yesod Sheb'Yesod, the bonding of bonding, the holding on really, really tight to understand that there is a different perspective in this world, even if we don't understand it. And that is the core of a person. That's the core of faith. That's what gives a person the power of faith, that belief. Without that sense of that other world, of Da'at Elyon, we can lose our way completely in this world. We just don't know where we are because there's no point of reference for us. So Yesod Sheb'Yesod, as with all of the other attributes we talk about on a daily basis, turns out to be actually quite important and relevant to our lives. But easier said than done, as everybody knows. And it's easy to have faith in abstract. It's much difficult to actually apply it when you need it, especially when funny things happen in our lives, which upset us and get deep down to our emotions. Okay, well, counting of the Omer. Hayom Shnayim V'Arba Yom Shehem Shisha Shavuot LeOmer. Today is the 42nd day of the Omer, which now completes, would you believe it, 6 complete weeks with just 1 week to go. And so we have been looking at the Sphira of Yesod, of bonding throughout this week, and we've seen it in all of its nuances and its different kinds of combinations. And today, being the 6th final day of the 6 days of the emotional attributes, we come to Malchut, to the sovereignty that exists within bonding. Bonding, as we have discovered over the last few days, is one of the most powerful instincts in a human being, and a very necessary one, because it's the one that connects us with other people. This magnet that draws us towards people is a very important force in our lives, because without it we remain deeply isolated, locked into our own beings, without any connection or understanding of other people, and without being able to share their feelings, their emotions, their love, and all the other things. All of that comes from this powerful force within us, within pretty much all of nature, called bonding, in the animal world as well, in different ways, of course, and different for different animals. But as human beings, we bond, and we bond for a very long time. We bond in a core relationship with a spouse, if we are fortunate enough to have that in our lives. And that is normally, hopefully, a monogamous relationship. Unlike with many animals, we don't mate with others after that. We bond with a single person. We bond with our children lifelong. We bond with our parents lifelong. Sometimes we bond with friends lifelong, especially the friends which we've made in the earliest years, sometimes the strongest bondings. Even after many years of separation, we come back together again. It's just like old times. One is able to pick up where one left off, because that is the power of bonding. But like every good thing in this world, bonding also has an enormous danger that's built into it. It can be a very risky business. And the reason for that is because it is such a powerful magnet, and it tugs so deeply that it is possible that in the process of bonding, a person can actually lose themselves, lose their own sense of identity, lose their own sense of autonomy, lose their own sense, effectively, of sovereignty, which is what Malchut stands for, the sovereignty, the autonomy that lies within the human being. And so you see, therefore, that sometimes people will enter, and it's a puzzle, into a relationship, into a marriage, which is clearly, going to be problematic, where there's going to be abuse down the line. What happened? Did the person not see that in the other person originally? Did they not know that those tendencies were there, that they were entering into a relationship with a person who wanted to be controlling and bullying and own you and everything else, and totally decimate your own sense of being, because they needed to bond with you so powerfully that it completely and totally obliterated you. They needed you for themselves. Their bonding was so powerful that you lost your own sense of being. How did that happen? Did you not see it? Did you not know it? Did you misjudge the person at the time of marriage, that you landed up in that kind of relationship? And the answer is, we needed it too much. So let's say love is blind. It's blind because we need to bond with another person, and therefore we project onto them all the things that we need in our lives onto that person, whether it's real or not. And very often, or sometimes, it's not real. And we only discover it a lot later. And so there's a lot of pain, and marriages break up, and all kinds of stuff happens with its impact upon children, and et cetera, et cetera. And that is because there's a dangerous dimension to bonding, and it is the loss of individual sovereignty. I think it also explains something about religious fanaticism, that a person becomes so deeply attached to an ideal in religion that they actually lose themselves. I saw it in a very small way in the early years of when I was in yeshiva, in those heady days when we were all becoming ba'alei teshuva. I saw, particularly, funny enough, the English boys somehow managed, because we're slightly more reserved, South Africans, Anglo-Saxons, they didn't throw themselves into it in quite the same way. They always had a little bit of holding back. The Americans, those who had been involved in the hippie culture particularly, they just threw themselves into religion with such an intensity that they almost kind of lost themselves. The core was gone. Their own sense of sovereignty was no longer there. It becomes something else. And that's what happens because you need to bond with an idea so deeply. You need to bond with this idea of the spiritual, of God, so powerfully that you can lose yourself in the process. And so Malchut, the sovereignty of bonding, comes to teach us that bonding has to, just as there was restraint in bonding, and just as there's love in bonding, and just as there is humility in bonding, and all the other things we've spoken about, you never ever bond with another person to the point where you allow your own sense of self to be completely lost and swallowed up by the other person. And, in relationships, I was really interested, with this scientist on Sage who had to sort of step away from his post because he had an affair with his mistress. And I was so interested to read that this woman is in an open marriage. What a lovely term, an open marriage. It looks like it's very open. In marriages, you have two extremes. You have the one extreme, an open marriage, in which each partner can do whatever they like. It's just, they happen to, in some way or another, connect with each other, run a family, run their affairs together, etc. But in terms of relationships, they can be wherever they want. And there's no jealousy, there's no possessiveness, anything else. That's the one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum are those relationships who are totally, completely controlling, where one person needs to control the other. Everybody knows that a marriage that really works is one which is balanced, where the power between the parties is balanced. In other words, the bonding between the two is one which has perspective, where each one of you respect the other person for their integrity, for their self, for their being. There's space in the marriage, in each marriage, a little bit more, a little bit less. Each couple work this out for themselves. But what is the essence of it is that each party has to have their own sense of self, their own sovereignty, and it has to be recognized by the other. And you can't ever allow bonding to override that, either to the other person, and neither should you ever allow yourself to become so caught up in your need to bond that you make the wrong decisions about who to bond with. And that is the idea of, I think, is the idea of Malchut Shebi Yesod, which now completes the sixth week and brings us into the final week from tomorrow onwards, the whole week of sovereignty, in which we're going to have to explore its concept in our lives a lot more deeply through all of the different kinds of variations on the theme. So look forward to that. The final week of the Sfirot, and we start this week on the sixth of the emotional attributes through which the world was created, and it is called Malchut, sovereignty. This is absolutely central. we say in the Amidah, sorry, not the Amidah, in Psalm 145, Ashrei, Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim. Your sovereignty is the sovereignty of the entire world. We constantly refer to God as sovereign, as king. It's replete in all of our prayers. And as a tremendous divine gift, he has bequeathed some of that quality to human beings. Malchut, the sense of sovereignty, is the sense of independence and identity that every human being has. The sense that I am an independent creature in this world. I feel myself. I'm aware of my presence. I'm aware of my authority. I'm aware of the control that I have over my environment, over myself. All of that is a divine quality that has actually been given in small part to us as human beings. Those of you who've been taking the Pilates classes will know that the central to Pilates is this idea that in our bodies there is a core, and that core is somewhere down here in the abdominal area. If the core is weak, then the rest of the body basically falls apart. If the core is strong, which is what Pilates and yoga tries to achieve, a strong core means a healthy person. Malchut, the sense of my own presence, the sense of my own identity, the sense of my own authority, the sense of my leadership, the sense of my sovereignty as a dignified, worthwhile human being is the core of everything else that happens in our lives. And that is why Malchut is actually fundamentally different to the other Sfirot, because it is all of the other emotions that we've been dealing with are actions, whereas Malchut is actually a state of being. It takes all of the other emotional attributes, channeled into it and expressed through it into the world. It's a conduit, a receiver, and a giver. In that respect, Malchut is considered in the divine Sfirot to be equivalent to the Shekhinah, the feminine dimension of universe between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, giver and receiver. Since Malchut is a receiver and a creator, just as a woman receives the semen and then creates life, she's a receiver and a giver, so too Malchut in all of us takes all of those qualities. And so looking at what we have been discussing for the last few weeks, when love and discipline and compassion and endurance and humility, all the other Sfirot, when they're properly channeled into our psyche, into our being, and they're expressed through bonding, that allows our sovereignty to express itself in the world. That is what Malchut does. Today, of course, starts with Chesed Sheba Malchut, the beginning of the next 6 days leading up to Shavuot. The Chesed of Malchut, the love that has to be in sovereignty, is when you encounter a human being and you see them for who they are, and they emanate out of them a sense of love for humanity, for people. It's something which you feel in them. They are people of love. They've internalized love as part of their being, and they beam it out in all their actions. It's not something which is kind of like corny or, touchy-feely or anything like that. It's not, a person who walks around with a big grin on their face, but you sense from them that there's a certain kind of majesty that they carry inside of themselves, and a sense of embracing, a sense of openness, a sense of giving, a sense of love for the world around them. And that is when Chesed, the power of love, has embedded itself within a person's being, and their own sense of self and sovereignty is able to express that love in such a way that it is sensed and felt by the people who come into contact with them. And that is why sometimes you meet these extraordinary human beings in the world. And by the way, Harav Menachem HaKohen, the man we had the privilege to to interview last night and to hear his story. If you would know this man, you'd know that he is a man of extraordinary love. And there are others like him. And when you meet them, it's a real sense of privilege. Somehow you just feel emanating out of them. There's something special. You can't quite even put your finger on, but you know that it's there. That is the chesed that is within Malchut. And that is the sphira and the emotion for us today. In situations, I am here and I'm in control. And it's very important to understand, particularly in relationships, that there are certain areas in which one has to step back and not be in control. Now, you have to know where the no-go areas are. And very often human beings don't actually get this. And I'm sure there must be lots of people here today who have accused their spouses of being overly controlling. In other words, they have not recognized where the boundaries are, and that there are times when you simply do not exercise authority. One has to be aware of one's limitations as much as one's strengths. When ego gets in the way, or you become just too obsessed with making sure that everything is right, you become overbearing. You assert your authority in the family, of your children, of your wives, in such a way that you leave them no space to breathe, and it leads to lots and lots of problems. Tiferet, harmony, is something which is very, very special. Many of you will, know from those of you who have children at home, how sometimes you can have, one child who's incredibly disruptive, and they just create havoc all around. Every room that they're in, every situation they're in leads to kind of discord, etc. And other children have this amazingly calming effect. They have this ability there's something about them that just pulls people together, that creates a sense of harmony, a sense of peacefulness. And that's, human beings are like that. You have some human beings who just have this ability to create a good space in every situation they're in. They just seem to be able to bring out the best in the people around them, to generate kind of like almost exude a sense of peace, a sense of harmony that creates good feelings all around. You just always feel calm in their presence. And there are other human beings who you just know that they just create discord. People are on edge. It's nothing that they are saying. It's something deeply instinctive. It's in the body language, it's in attitudinal. That is the issue of the way in which every human being in every situation is presenting their presence. That's my malchut. That's my sovereignty. I'm a person who's here, and I am going to beam out from me a certain kind of feeling to everybody else around me as well. And we pick up those signals. We're aware of it. When a person has tiferet in malchut, when their sovereignty has this, they've been able to take this, and the reason is because actually they are at ease inside of themselves. If you're agitated in yourself, you agitate everyone else. If you're whole in yourself, and you're at peace in yourself, and you have harmony in yourself, and you know where the areas of restraint are, and you know how to exude love as well, and you've got that balance between love and holding back, because you've got this inside of you, because you've harmonized your own being, you create harmony in the environment around you. And that, I think, is the idea, this beautiful idea of Tiferet Sheba Malchut. And the funny thing is, we've all experienced it in one way or another, either positively or negatively. I think everybody would intuitively understand what I'm trying to say, because we've all recognized it in either in our family situations, sometimes with siblings, and other kinds of social situations as well. So that is our thought for the day. By the way, just very quickly, Solomon Sebag sent me today while we're talking, an article in the Financial Times that looks at US data concerning the effect of the coronavirus on faith. The percentage of US adults who say that as a result of the pandemic, their own religious faith has become stronger or weaker. And there's a graph, and it's really, really fascinating. It's a bar chart. It's really fascinating. It's got on one side stronger, on the other side weaker. Turns out that Protestants' faith has leapt enormously in the just exponentially. Their faith has increased. Okay, Catholics less so, but also very significant. On the other side, in the decrease, the Catholics are Protestants, very little decrease in faith. Catholics, a little bit more decrease of faith. And the next bar is Jews. Okay, we are a funny people. There's been the smallest increase in faith amongst Jews in the United States of America, and virtually no decrease in faith amongst in the United States. In other words, we remain the same old cynical bunch that we ever were. You can't move us in a pandemic. Isn't that great? However, it has led to more faith. Not quite the same as a Protestant or as a Catholic, but there's a little bit, they've gone with the trend. I thought that was really very fascinating. Wish you all Chodesh Tov, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you all for your participation. Lovely participation. Hayom Shisha v'Arba Miyom Shehem Shisha Shavuot v'Arba Yomim LaOmer. Today is the 46th day of the Omer, which is 6 weeks and 4 days, with just 3 days to go. So we are still, of course, in the week of Malchut. The attribute of Malchut. Malchut is our sovereignty, our sense of self, our sense of being, the way in which we present ourselves to the world, our identity and our authority in the way in which we connect and the way in which we feel our presence in the world. That's the whole week of Malchut, and today is Netzach. Netzach we've always translated as endurance, the power of endurance or of resilience. And the question is then, in what way do we express resilience or endurance in our sense of being and our sense of authority? And I think the answer to that is that in the ups and downs of our lives, there are times when we feel a lot stronger in ourselves and a lot more assertive, and feel that we can get on with our lives and do the things that we want to do. We feel very strong in ourselves. The sense of our malchut, of our identity, etc., pulsates very powerfully in us. There are other times in our lives, either just because of the rhythm of life or because of the battering that we take in the things which happen around us. Often after bereavement or after something which has simply not gone right in a relationship in one's life, or this terrible thing called depression that strikes us not from the outside but from the inside, you lose yourself. You just don't feel that you can assert yourself. It's almost as if we shrink into our little shell, and we just can't be there as a strong person. It's as if all the strength has seeped out of us, and we're not able to hold ourselves and to face the world. One of the strongest forces in this world is a force which in Hebrew is called ratzon, and in English is called will. Where does will reside? The will to live, the will to do something, the determination to do something, the ability to endure, and the resilience to want to continue. This very powerful thing called ratzon is something which resides deep within us. It's a gift from God, because as the sages said, al korchacha atachai. You live against your will. There is a powerful force to want to live. And even on the occasions when we lose it for a while, human beings, by and large, are very resilient. And we bounce back and we find the will to continue all over again, this will which is so mysterious, it is so deeply embedded somewhere within us. You can't point to the place where Ratzon resides in a person. Where is your will? And the answer is, it infuses your entire being. It's something which is very, very deep inside of us. So this idea of the netzach that's in Malchut is this idea that we always need to be working at being strong in ourselves and in our own assertiveness. And of course, we've looked at the other dimensions over here of humility, and that we'll come to tomorrow, and the other things. So assertiveness doesn't mean in a brash way, but it is the sense that I want to continue positively with my life. I don't want to give in. I don't want to throw up my hands, throw in the towel and to say, look, I just can't cope anymore. My own sense of self has shrunk to the point where I just don't feel that I have any real presence in the world. So one has to work at this. The netzach is something which when you feel it disappearing, some days you wake up and you feel so strong, so positive. You know, today I'm going to really manage, do the things I want to do. Today I'm going to achieve all the things that I want to. And other days you just wake up and you say, no, I just can't. I'm just too tired. I'm overwhelmed. I'm stressed out, etc. Those are the days when one has to draw on this netzach, on this endurance, on this power of endurance, on this inner will inside of a person to assert oneself to be strong, because we have to be strong every day, because every day is precious. And if you lose a day in our lives, you never get it back. It's gone forever. And we have allotted days. And every one of us has allotted days. And each one has to be filled with positiveness and with strength and with malchut, our own sense of being, our sovereignty. And that is the idea of the netzach, which has to be present in malchut. And now, just to find the counting, Hayom Shiva v'Arbam Yom Shehem Shisha Shavot v'Chamisha Yamim LaOmer. Today is the 47th day of the Omer, 6 weeks and 5 days. No guesses for how many days are left. And that therefore brings us still in the week of Malchut, in which we express our own sense of identity, of sovereignty, of our presence in the world. And today is Hod, humility. You'll know by now what humility means. The Hod, the humility that comes with this sense of presence and of assertiveness, is the way in which a person comports himself. The way it's very hard for any person to know how they come over to other people. The only person who ever tells us the truth about ourselves normally is a spouse, but no one else does. So one's left wondering what kind of impression one makes when one walks along in the world, when you come into contact with other people. The question is, how do you actually, if you're a person, you know that you, first of all, you've got this huge energy in you that you want to assert yourself. There are things that you want to do. So it's a strong feeling that I want to achieve and I want to do. And that seems to run counter to an idea of humility. Second of all, there's an obligation if a person has been granted certain talents to actually utilize them in the very best way, which also mitigates against a sense of humility. So how does one become humble? I think actually, for the first time I've seen this, that the answer lies in a line, in one of my favorite lines, in Psalm 16 that Bear has just read to us. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I'm well content with my inheritance. Isn't that beautiful? The lines have, a person says, the lines have fallen to me. In other words, I didn't choose it. God has given it to me. I'm happy and content with what I have. And if a person has that inside of them, they walk with a sense of profound humility. That doesn't mean to say that they walk with their head down and, you know, this sort of thing. That's not what we call humility. It is assertive. I am here, I'm a presence, but you never get a feeling from them that they're either boastful or that they are trying to prove something, or that they're trying to make their mark, that there's an ego, competitiveness, that there's ego, you know, or jealousy or show-offiness, anything else. People think that charisma means, you know, somebody cavorting around a stage, you know, waving their hands around, etc. Charisma can be very, very quiet. It's just the presence of the person and the feeling that this is a contained person who has no sense, who's not carrying themselves with a sense of pride, a person who's at ease with himself, content because with what's been given to him, content with who they are, not jealous of another person, recognizing that we're all given different talents, and that I can't be someone else. And the best that I can do in my life is to try and be me. And sometimes it takes quite a long time to find out who me is, especially for young people. But when we live with ourselves for a very long time, and after we've lived with ourselves for long enough, we begin to understand who we are, what our limitations are, and what our strengths are. And you carry that through, but you carry it with a sense of humility. You just don't impose, you don't ever give a sense that I am wanting to show off who I am. And all that comes from a sense of deep contentment and acceptance that the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. I just love that English phrase. It actually works a lot better than the Hebrew. And the translation is really lovely. So that is the hod, the humility that lies in the sovereignty of humanness. And we come now to Hayom Shmona v'arba'im yom shehem shisha shavuot v'shisha yom le'omer. Today is the 48th day of the Omer. That is 6 weeks and 6 days. It is the penultimate day of the counting of the Omer. Tomorrow, please God, we will complete it, and I will use the opportunity to summarize it, to put into perspective, and to reflect on the journey that we've taken over the past 7 weeks. But for today, we are, of course, still in the week of Malchut, which we have always defined as sovereignty, independence, self-reliance, my sense of self, my sense of control, that I'm in control of myself, I'm in control of my environment, my very strong sense of independence. And being the 6th day of the week, therefore, it now combines with Yesod, which is the attribute, the emotion of bonding, the ability of a human being to bond. So let's see how we put these two together now. There are two extremes in terms of our sense of independence, our sense of Malchut. One is a person who simply cannot bear to be alone. They just have to be with other people all the time. They are such social creatures that they're needy. They need to be around other people. They can't bear to be on their own. At the other extreme, you have people who are so independent that they don't want to be with anybody or accept any help. You probably have encountered in elderly parents or in elderly people this sense that I don't want your help, I'm independent, I don't take my independence away, don't do things for me, I can continue to do things myself even when they get to the point where actually they can't. But the sense of independence in a human being is so fierce that a person will cling on to it and be afraid to lose it because they feel that in allowing other people to do things for themselves, they're ceding their own sense of identity, their own authority over themselves, their own sense of independence. They become dependent on other people, and that is something which seems to affect our very own sense of our personal dignity, that something is being taken, away from me. They say one of the ways in which you know that you're getting old is when you hear your children speaking about you in your presence. Like, the kids are sitting around and dad is sitting in the room, and one child says to the other, doesn't dad look good, Ken and Horror? And dad goes, and it's like the person's not there, and that's what a person's afraid of. So you have these two extremes, and both of them, when taken to an extreme, are problematic. For obvious reasons, the person who needs to be helped and doesn't want to receive that help puts himself in a dangerous situation. On the other extreme, the person who's so deeply needy of other people puts themselves in a position where they actually lose their own identity. So either the identity is too strong, or it is lost, because you're always clinging onto somebody else's identity. You need them, their personality. It's almost as if you despise your own, and you can't bear, therefore, to be in your own company. So bonding is the pipeline between those two extremes. Bonding is the way in which the valve which regulates where a person is in terms of their own sense of identity and authority. A balanced person finds the way to bond with others in such a way that not only does it diminish their own sense of self, but it actually enhances them, because they respect the other person for who they are, and therefore they have greater respect for who they are, for themselves. And the bonding is actually something which is positive and helpful and connecting between the two people and strengthening for the person himself. Where we find the balance, the extent to which we turn on the bonding or turn off the bonding, is something which we've been looking at in the past when we looked at the week of bonding, because we know that over bonding is unhealthy, under bonding is unhealthy. There is a balance in this very important thing that takes us out of ourselves and connects us to the world around. Who was the poet that said, no man is an island unto himself? We need to be with other people, but we need to be with them in a healthy way. And the way in which we connect with other people is through Yesod, is through the ability to connect, to bond, and finding the balance in that bonding without taking away, without diminishing the sense of sovereignty and self, is what one works on when one is looking at today the Yesod of Malchut. That's our understanding of this particular attribute. And tomorrow we come to the last one. As I say, we'll have a bit of a discussion about this journey that we've taken over the past 7 weeks. And I'm stumped as to what we're going to do after Shavuot, but no doubt we'll come back and we'll find something for the morning thought. Okay. Hayom Tisha v'Arba'im Yom Shehem Shiva Shavuot LaOmer. Today is the 49th day of the Omer, which is 7 complete weeks. We have been on a long journey over 7 weeks, every single day other than Shabbat, when we have explored these. And I want to put it now into perspective and sum it all up. And I want to go back to a much, much earlier stage, and the way in which the Kabbalists describe the creation of the universe, that the Almighty creates 10 very, very powerful forces. They are the instruments, they are the energies through which the entire fabric of the universe and its spirit is going to be created. 3 of them are called intellectual, 7 of them are called the emotional attributes. And they are the ones that we have become very familiar with over the last 7 weeks. They are Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet, and Netzach, and Hod, and Yesod, and Malchut. And these forces are so powerful that they clash with each other. There's no space for them to coexist. Chesed and Gevurah, giving and holding back, cannot coexist in the same place. So there's an almighty kind of explosion. It's a world called Tohu by the Kabbalists. It's chaos, and the world disintegrates. That's the first early stage. Then there is a reconstruction. The same forces, the same energies are brought back into the world, but they're modified so that they can actually interconnect each with the other, and each one can hold the other. They have to become a lot weaker in order for that to happen, a lot less intense. But at the same time, there's enormous advantage because now they can coexist, and each one can contain a little bit of the other. And this second world is called tikkun, which means to repair. It's a world which has been repaired, in which all of the different forces, these powerful forces now are able together to work together in the world to create a harmonious universe. And the forces are embedded in the world. And then God creates man. And in creating man, he drops into each one of us, man and woman, a neshama. And that neshama is part of him himself. And in order for that neshama to come down into us and to be able to function and operate in the body and into the world around, it too needs to have energy and forces, which are now called kochot, soul powers. And surprise, surprise, they are the same, exactly the same building blocks. It's chokhmah, bina, da'at at the intellectual level. And then the 7 emotional attributes, which change in terms of, not in their Hebrew name, but in terms of their function within a human being. Because now chesed becomes love, and gevurah becomes restraint, and tiferet becomes compassion, and netzach becomes endurance, and hod becomes humility, yesod becomes bonding, and malchut becomes sovereignty. And those are the 7 forces, the soul forces with which we have been playing, explaining, exploring over the last 7 weeks. And because there are 7 of them, and each one can contain 7, each one of the others, 7 times 7 brings us to the 49. And that is how we've arrived at 49 days. And each single day, we have looked, explored another combination of these forces, which are the way in which a human being is metaken, brings tikkun into oneself in terms of the perfection of humanness and into the world around us. Now, of course, these forces are not exclusive to all of the kind of emotions which swirl around in complex creatures called human beings, because we also have things like jealousy, and we have things like anger, and we have things like disappointment, and all kinds of other things which are not mentioned over here. But they are seen always as being consumed, somewhere contained within these 7 fundamental soul powers that is invested in every human being. That you can trace it back to one of these if you understand it deeply enough. So this is the process in which, with these 7 forces and each one of them combining with the other, this is the way in which a human being who starts off, as everybody knows, anybody who's had children will know that we're actually born like little selfish animals. Yeah, no difference to animals in our selfishness, in our self-absorption, in our narcissism, etc. And somewhere in the process we have to grow to become refined human beings of sensitivity, human beings who can bring tikkun to our own souls and can bring tikkun to the world around us. In order to do that, one has to have total control over one's emotions, over one's internal being, in terms of all the emotional stuff which happens inside of us. That's the journey that we have been exploring each day for the last 49 days. That brings us today to the culmination. And the culmination of all of these is Malchut Sheba Malchut, the sovereignty of sovereignty. And that is the stage that a person reaches when, having been through all the process of refinement and perfection, one reaches a point where one deeply, deeply understands who I am and what my role is in this universe, understands why I'm here and what it is that is unique about me, of all the billions of people in the world, each single human being is absolutely unique, a one-off, even twins. And each one is given a special role in this universe with a combination of these energies and forces that is unique to each one. And when one has this degree of self-knowledge and the assurance and the confidence to be able to say, I know who I am, and I know what my role is in this universe. I know what it is that I need to do. I know what my special qualities are. I know what the gifts are that have been given to me, and I know how to exercise them. I am an integrated, complete, refined human being. That's called Malchut Sheba Malchut. That's the 49th level. But actually, that's not where we stop. That's just about as far as a human being can take themselves in terms of self-perfection. And once you have completed the 49, you have to reiterate it again over and over and over again, just like, when you exercise, and no sooner have you finished a set of exercises, you go back and do the same exercises all over again to get better and better and stronger and stronger. So with these 49, we're constantly working on them, even though this is a special period of the year when we focus on them. So the journey never ends, but in the end, it takes us only to the point that a human being can reach through their own efforts. And when we have reached that apex, we need to have a little bit of help from above. Because is there another dimension that no human being can achieve on their own? And that is the spirit of the divine that has to be drawn down into their being so they become not just a refined human being, but a godly human being. Somebody who is imitatio Deo, who can be as much as a human being can be in the image of God. And for that, we need to reach up and to draw down into us another kind of dimension that comes from totally beyond the finite. The element of the infinite that comes into our beings. Of course, we're all finite. All of us have a finite life. All of us will die. But in our lives, we can actually carry inside of us and allow to exude from us something of the infinite neshama that's in us, the little bit of God that exists within us. And for that, we need Shavuot. That is the 50th level. The 50th level that no human being can attain of their own. The 50th level is the God-given level. 49 is what a human being can do by themselves. 50 is what God gives us. That's why we speak in the Kabbalah of the Nun Sha'arei Binah, the 50th gate of knowledge, of insight. The 50th gate belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is why we speak about the fact that when the Jews were in Egypt, they were in the 49th level of impurity, and they were pulled out, and they went through a stage of 49 levels of self-purification until they stood at Sinai in the 50th day, and then something magical happened because the infinite and the finite became fused, brought together in a mystery called human life, called the divine within the finite. So that's the story of the journey that we've been on. And I hope you've enjoyed it. I've tried to explain it as best I can with my limited understanding. These are deep matters. And as always, these things are easier to explain than actually to do. This process of refinement, of refining ourselves, of becoming better human beings, is a lifetime struggle in all of us. And reality is that from time to time, we fail as well. We're just, after all, just human. And we're a bag of emotions, and things affect us, etc. So we don't always have this control. But this is the inner story of Judaism. This is what is called avodah. This is what is called the process of serving God. And that's the whole idea of prayer is to help us in this process. Study helps us in this process. This is the underpinnings of everything that we are as Jews. The working on ourselves to create tikkun in ourselves and tikkun in the world around us. That is my piece for the day. So